Why is it that when I drink mate or coffee, which are my preferred sources of caffeine, do I feel a mental and physical lift?
So I'm going to suggest, counter to what most people would think, drink coffee. I would say the dose and the timing makes the poison. Caffeine is in a class of drugs that we call a psychoactive stimulant. So it works through a variety of mechanisms. One is a dopamine mechanism. Dopamine we often think of as a reward chemical, but dopamine is also very much an alerting neurochemical as well. And caffeine has some role, it seems, to play in increasing dopamine. But its principal mode of action, we believe, in terms of making me more alert and keeping me awake throughout the day, is on the effects of adenosine. And to explain what adenosine is, from the moment that you and I woke up this morning, this chemical adenosine has been building up in our brain. And the longer that we're awake, the more of that adenosine accumulates. So the adenosine here that we're talking about that is creating the sleep pressure is a central brain phenomenon, and it comes from the neurons themselves combusting energy. And as they're combusting energy, one of the offshoots of that is this chemical adenosine. And so as we're awake throughout the day and our brain is metabolically very active, it's accumulating and building up this adenosine. Now, the more adenosine that we have, the sleepier that we will feel. So it really is like a sleep pressure is what we call it. Now, it's not a mechanical pressure. Don't worry, your head's not going to explode. It's a chemical pressure. And it's this weight of sleepiness that we feel gradually growing as we get into the evening. Yeah.
So are those neurons shutting down as a consequence of having too much adenosine, or are there areas of the brain that promote sleepiness that are becoming activated?
There are two main receptors for adenosine, and they have different modes of activating brain cells or inactivating or decreasing the likelihood of firing. And adenosine works in this beautiful, elegant way where it will inhibit and shut down the wake-promoting areas of the brain, whilst also increasing and dialing up the volume on sleep-activating, sleep-promoting regions.
So this is another example where, as I am awake longer, adenosine is released in the brain, and my wakefulness areas are being actively shut down by that adenosine, and my sleepiness brain areas, so to speak, are being promoted to be more active. Is that correct?
That's right. And it's a very progressive process, but it's usually because you've been sort of driving through and, as we'll come on to, have caffeine in the system. And then all of a sudden you just hit a wall and it just, engulfs you, and you go from a 0 to the 1 of sleepiness within a short period of time. Caffeine comes into play here because caffeine comes into your system and it latches onto those welcome sites of adenosine, the adenosine receptor. But what it doesn't do is latch onto them and activate them. Because if it was doing that, then it would, in lots of ways, it would dial up more sort of sleepiness. It does the opposite. The way that caffeine works is that it comes in, competes with quite sharp elbows with adenosine, competitively, forces them out of the way, hijacks that receptor by latching onto it, but then just essentially blocks it. It doesn't inactivate the receptor. It doesn't activate the receptor. It functionally inactivates it in the sense that it takes it out of the game for adenosine. So it's like someone, coming into a room and you're just about to sit down on the chair and caffeine comes in and just pulls out the chair and you're like, well, now I've got nowhere to sit. And caffeine just keeps pulling out the chairs from adenosine, and adenosine, even though it's at the same concentration in your brain doesn't know that you've been awake for, 10 hours at that point when you've downed a cup of coffee, because all of that adenosine that's still there can't communicate to the brain that you've been awake for 16 hours.